abstruse, and esoteric of enlightenment.
Thank you, Typhon.
Abstruse entertainment, a new genre. I am not going to broach yet, but maybe one day. So today, we're talking about Enochian and left-hand path. And I'm talking about it not just because it's a left-hand path conference. I only undertake projects because they interest me greatly. And I see a gap, I see a lacuna, I see a reason to do it. And so initially when I was working on this, I was thinking, okay, the easy way out is to talk about the formation of the cacodemon names. Is anybody familiar with, how many people are familiar with the system of John Dean's read? The formation of the cacodemon names, you have the four tablets of the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water, held in union by the central cross of the four angels of the tablet of union, Exarch, Pecunic, Beatum, and Nanta. To form the demon names, you get each of the tablet is then divided up into four subsquares. So in the air tablet, you'll have fire bear, water bear, earth bear, air bear. And then there's a little cavalry cross in each of those squares, and then the names of the angels in each of those, and by reversing, spelling the name of angel, and then going to the central cross and plucking a letter from that, you have the name of the demon. And I am grossly oversimplifying it. Anybody who's actually looked at it would know that I'm being as facetious as one could possibly be. It is the most annoyingly idiosyncratic, strange, and the rule doesn't even hold fast on the formation of the demon names. That's the pain in the neck. It's like every once in a while you get an exception, and you're like, okay, what do we do now? And the other reason I decided not to talk about that specifically, to focus on it, because Dee never said anything at all about actually using those cacodemons, those evil demon names, actually evoking them. And that's not the only reason why, because I thought about it for a minute, and there's a bit of wisdom that I picked up on, and a number of people reiterated, which goes to the effect, it really makes no difference whether it's angels, demons, chthonic forces, spheres, or whatever. The actual polarity, the influence, is determined by the intent of the magician. So you can call it demons and still have it not be left-hand path magic, i.e., it takes a special talent to really screw up against it is possible, and we all know the types. They can manage it, that is for sure. Rather, my interest is in something that is grossly overlooked in Dee and Kelly, is the implied messages, the minutiae, the little side statements, the things that the angels convey about the nature of the cause. And my reason for that's manifold, because there's more than enough written about the actual substantive use of the Enochian calls themselves. It's far from exhaustive, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit tonight as well. But it's those commentaries, advice, bits of information that come from the angels that are overlooked for the most part, and I think as left-hand path magicians, one thing we're good at, or we should be good at, is focusing on those microscopic bits of detail and evidence like good detectives. Now, the Enochian system of magic in general, for those who may not be super familiar, was developed by the polymath John Dee and Sir Edward Kelly. John Dee, during the 16th century, mid to late 16th century, is known for a number of achievements within the world of thought in Great Britain. He's known as a great scientist. He composed Euclid's the preface to Euclid's geometry. Did quite a bit of work on cartography. In fact, he was consulted by Abraham Ortelius and Gerard Mercator. And the circumnavigation of the globe was one of the projects that he helped to contribute to, albeit for his own nefarious purposes. to help further the British crown. And so Queen Elizabeth, he was one of her favorites. And there's probably a better than good chance that Dee would have gone to the stake had it not been for Elizabeth. Helps to have friends in high places. Same thing for John Milton. There's a number of people like that. John Milton, for what he wrote Paradise Lost and a number of other things. When Cromwell came to power, if he wasn't executed, there was a good reason for it. He just gone down based on that. Now, Dee's work in science and everything else, eventually, I'm just going to boil it all right down to. At one point he said, I reached an impasse with the scientific method. He had this method that he coined arch mastery. The use of empirical evidence, scientific data, any means at one's disposal to arrive at an understanding, a better understanding of nature, natural science, what have you. He said he reached an impasse. At that point, he said, I had to turn to magic. So it's wonderful to see somebody actually admitted that causal logic doesn't pan out in the end if you're really pushing the envelope hard in terms of actually trying to learn how the world works. So, everybody has a hand up, that's right, great. Thank you, Noah. I want to turn to one particular passage in the True and Faithful Relation, one that I find extremely pregnant with meaning. Every time I pick it up, I get a little bit more out of it. It expands, it unfolds. It's like what was the term C.S. Lewis used? Portmanteau case. It's like, we don't see portmanteau cases. I think it's one of these ones, luggage where you open it up and there's a compartment within a compartment that just keeps opening and opening and opening. And I think it's best termed as a portmanteau passage. And that's on page 1 of that handout. So, I'll read through that, and this is from the Archangel Gabriel to Dee and Kelly. I should set the stage for it. This was submitted to Dee and Kelly. This oration was delivered to them right after they got the English version of the first Enochian call. I think it was on the same day. On April 14, 1584, we're quickly approaching the 432nd anniversary. So I don't know what to do on that day, but might as well celebrate it somehow. Do some infernal magic, listen to the angels, listen to the demons. There are two kinds of visions. The one by infusion of will and descending. The other by infusion of permission and ascending. The first is the image of the will of God descending into the body and adjoined to the soul of man, whose nature is to distinguish things of his own likeness, but shut up in the prison of the body, wanteth that power, and therefore being illuminated by spiritual presence inwardly, seeth now in part as he shall hereafter do in the whole. But not that every vision is according to the soul of man in power, and so is received of him that seeth. The body of man feeleth nothing spiritual until he be of incorruption. Therefore useth no sense in and illumination. The other is to be found out by his contrary. I love angelic rhetoric. Actually, there's one of the best, there's a lot of good one-liners. What's the one from Now Bodge? Our wisdom shall prove rhetoric. Bet Dee wrapped his head around that one for a little bit. Now, rather than merely just offer my own interpretation of this section, I like to keep things within context. I consider myself, for lack of better words, part of the new historicist movement. I like to look at historical artifacts within the context of the historical period in which they were generated. I think you get a better read. It's not the only read, it's not the most accurate, and it's certainly myopic to think that we can actually capture everything at the time. That's one of, at least the new historicists, such as Greenspan and Orwell both, will be the first to admit, if you think you're going to know exactly how people thought, felt, and everything else, ain't possible. But it's worth trying. So as a result of that, I want to turn to the thought of Giordano Bruno, because Bruno was contemporaneous in Dee's time. And Bruno had some really amazing things to say, which people do not take into account enough. There's too many coincidences between the two to ignore. So that's why I'm turning to that right now. Bruno was best known probably for his work on visually cued mnemonics, the Umbris Idiotic, the shadow of ideas. In a lot of ways, I won't even try to describe it. In a lot of ways, it's quite similar to Speer's idea of atavistic resurgence. The book's really part of the whole movement of the time, the art of memory. The use of figures, images, the creative imagination to store and retrieve things that the individual was trying to remember, as opposed to just straight memorization by rote. That was Erasmus and the whole humanist school still adhered to the, just repeat, 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 and you'll remember it. They thought there was a better way to go about it, and I think they were right. Also, Bruno was responsible for the book, The Figure of Figures, the Sigillorum, which is, in a lot of ways, a precursor to Speer's idea, his thought on sigils as well. Now, Bruno was lecturing on Copernicanism in 1583 at Oxford. And in fact, it was not well received. People were still ardent geocentrists at that time. In fact, he was too. He wouldn't have liked Bruno. And I guess it probably fit in with a lot of people on YouTube, right? We got a lot of geocentrists left for some reason that sort of evades my mind, but there they are, unfortunately. They don't have an excuse. D and people at that time, but because the math hadn't really been fleshed out the whole way. So it's understandable, I think. Now, the important thing is, Bruno's published a massive amount of stuff in England right in 1584. In fact, he's at Oxford lecturing when Sir Philip Sidney and Albrecht Lasky go to listen to his lectures. This is really important because a year later, guess where D is? The estate of Albrecht Lasky in Krakow, receiving the Enochian calls to creation. Bruno dedicated 2 books to Sidney. The one was The Cabal of Pegasus. Really curious book. It's not a law book. The other one, Ash Wednesday, I believe. That was a long time. Now, Bruno also traveled to Alnwick Castle, which was the estate. This is in northern England. It's right on the border of Scotland, out in the hinterlands. Henry Percy, the Ninth Earl, or the Wizard Earl of Northumberland. Because he lived out there, he figured, people are going to leave me alone. I can study alchemy, magic. I can have these great minds surround me. We'll be left alone. And so, it's a good chance he was out there. In short, I'm just trying to paint a picture so you have an idea that their paths probably crossed, if not physically. And a lot of people suggest there's evidence where I haven't seen it really that's incontrovertible at this point. But at least intellectually, we know the paths had to cross because he was just a voracious reader. Now, the important thing with this passage, and we'll get to it in a minute, Bruno's influences. As Thomas Carlson brought up the other day, and I was mentioning my one question about the idea of antinomianism, we've got the whole burgeoning of negative theology at that point. Nicholas of Cusa and his whole idea of learned ignorance is his one book. The idea that thesis and antithesis all have to be taken into consideration to understand the truth of things. You can't just look at supporting evidence. You have to look at the evidence that actually tears apart or pulls the foundation apart, or else you're not going to know. Understanding depends on duality, is what he basically stated. And so you've got a lot of texts. You've got a lot of things that show up with descriptions of God as being, he is everywhere but nowhere at the same time. Things like that. In fact, Second Enochian Call to Spirit is one of my favorite apophatic texts. How does it go? Can the wings of the winds of wonder understand you, O the second of the first, whom the burning flames have framed within the depths of my jaws, whom I have prepared as cups for a wedding, or as flowers of beauty for the chamber of righteousness. Stronger are your feet than the barren stone, and mightier are your voices than the manifold winds, for you are become a building such as is not in the mind of the all-powerful. What an amazing piece of writing. And I always come back. It's one of the few that the English part at least, I made a point to commit to memory. Because it's wonderful. You can drift on it. The mind can play with it a million ways. Now, the other thing that's important about Bruno, which I'm amazed he hasn't gotten enough credit for, is he had this whole idea of reciprocity and circularity in the way the universe works. In fact, right at the time, obviously, Renaissance England, this is the rebirth of classical thought, Neoplatonism, microcosm, macrocosm. Bruno maintained that there is no division between microcosm and macrocosm. This is a key point. Nobody else really, and his whole thing really was backed up with this concept of the continuous body. Almost works like modern physics. There's this body, not like a physical body, but actually a body that is the unifying element in the universe. It has no form, but it contains all dimension. It has breadth, but no way to measure it. And another important thing to keep in mind about Bruno, he didn't go out and lambaste people. He said, just because people may not agree with this concept, I'm not saying that microcosm, macrocosm theory is incorrect. I'm saying that for some people, this is all that their awareness can deal with. That's an important move in humanism. You don't see that sort of thing out of anyone else. To me, that's the hallmark of somebody who actually knows what the hell he's talking about. And with the coincidence of opposites, he gives one of the better examples. He gives the example of antivenom, the idea that snake bite is cured by using something that's made from the bite that causes the wound itself. The pharmacon, in essence, that thing which can heal that can actually kill at the same time. Now, let us return to that passage. Now we've got a framework, we've got some thought to work with, established at a time. We can make a little bit of sense out of it. But not that every vision is according to the soul of man in power, and so is received of him that seeth. The body of man feeleth nothing spiritual until he be of incorruption. Therefore useth no sense in and illumination. The others to be found out by his contrary. This part of Gabriel's cryptic message now begins to open up, given Bruno's perspective. On one hand, Gabriel is suggesting a paradox, namely that man will not achieve anything spiritual until he's free from incorruption. Obviously, guess what that means? It's never going to happen, right? And so it's obviously impossible. So it's time to give up the silly proceeding on John D. Head home and get drunk. Well, not really. Because we get the extremely telling and pregnant resolve at the close. Therefore useth no sense in and illumination. The others to be found out by his contrary. There appears to be a coincidence of opposites here, obviously, implicitly as well as explicitly. Don't use the senses or common sense or sense period in illumination, or in and with the light. The other, whatever that may be, the opposite, the dark, is to be discovered by that which is contrary to illumination. So the embracing of the fallen condition as a means of attainment seems to be fairly replete in this section. It's as if it's a calling to the sons and daughters of Cain to gather awareness of their condition as a method of insight into the fallen state as something that's potentially elevated. So, just in this one passage, and we've only scratched the surface of it, we have something that's fairly broadly encompassing and sublime that really touches on a left-hand path initiation is beginning to emerge. Now, I want to turn to the Enochian calls themselves. Now we can actually get down to practical stuff we can do to make sense of this. So, I have chosen, as I've written about in volume 1 of my book, The Sacred Alignments and Dark Side of Sigils, that the English version of the Enochian calls are interesting tools in and of themselves, but they're renditions. They're not precisely what I would call translations of the Enochian, as Gabriel suggested when he says there are two kinds of visions, one by infusion of will descending, the other by infusion of permission and ascending. And it's the latter that concerns the matter of translation, because Dee and Kelly were heavily influenced by the Protestantized Christian approach to prayer and devotion. Anybody who's looked at the Trinitarian relation You'll see at the beginning of almost every spiritual seance these extremely long, protracted perorations. The Jesus Christ, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, blah, 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 just goes on and on and on forever. So we know mentally where they were at. There's no doubt about that. Now, the Enochian calls themselves, just to remind you quickly, there's the initial 18. So there's 2 calls to spirit. There's 1 for each of the elements, and then there's 1 for each of the sub-elements. So you've got, like I said, 2 to spirit, and then you have earth, fire, earth, water, earth, air, earth, etc., etc., etc. The remaining 30 are for the 30 ethers, and we're not going to touch on that today. We've got enough to deal with as it is. So, when I think of how deep, and when you look at the book of Scientific and Terrestrial Victory, that's where he transcribed these Enochian calls. Here's an important thing to keep in mind. You got to bear all this in mind when you look at the system, because it's not like a lot of systems of magic. Because obviously, when one of us here is working on something, we edit it, we work through it, we do a number of stages before we publish it. Guess what? Dee never went to publish any of it. He was careful. He didn't want to burn at the stake. Giordano Bruno, on the other hand, didn't write explicit works on magic. He wrote implied works, fairly important ones. We know what happened to him. 1660, Campo del Fiore, he was shut up with a wooden clamp literally on his tongue, dragged up to the stake and burned. People watched the clamp fall to the ground. Dee was careful for a good reason. Now, so in that book of Terrestrial and Earthly Victory, you've got the Enochian calls. He transcribed them. First, they show up in Sloan 46, which otherwise is the True and Faithful Relation. That's the version that you can buy. Stephen Skinner did a great edition. The used one's worth every penny, and he actually got most of the errata that was in the first edition because Mirko Savin published that after Dee's death, and he was using it as a tool to attack spiritualism, magic, and everything else. It's a good thing he was on that hell roll because he helped preserve it. And actually, I found instances by comparing it to microfilm where there are certain sections that actually decayed, and I think he caught them before they got lost. Because the whole manuscript was buried when Sir Robert Cotton got a hold of it. I think it was just a moldy, rotten, moldering mess. We're lucky we ever found it. So it's paired up, English, Enochian. So you figure, well, it's got to be the translation. But the first thing that comes to mind is something really important that Edmund Husserl had to say about a story within a story. Husserl was a sharp guy. He's one of the few phenomenologists I really enjoy because he didn't have a set agenda. You get a good idea when you're reading thought, memory, and consciousness that he's really aiming towards learning something rather than pushing an agenda. But anyhow, he says when you look at a novel, a story within the story, it's not really a story. Like what? It's merely a representation of a story. That's brilliant insight. And it makes you think about what people do when they translate, when they interpret, when they tell things secondhand. They're retelling them. Dee and Kelly, they're getting messages from the angels. We're not getting direct transmissions. We're getting 2 guys sitting probably in a fairly poorly lit room. Dee's scribbling down stuff as quick as he can. That's what we got. We've got a representation. So, the reason I bring that up is because it's an important phenomenological interpretation. And that's what we're faced with, whether or not you're interested in philosophy or not. When you're talking about magic, and you read about magic, and you listen to other people, you have to deal with their phenomenology, their description of the phenomenon, and all the baggage, mistakes, errors, and everything else that comes with it. So the 18 calls, it's my contention that the initial 18 calls to creation are invocations geared toward the destruction of ego, in part. That's what I really feel that they are set up to do. So in one sense, they represent a means to embody or subject the self to an apocalypse, or an equivalent in the East would be aspiring to the state of Shiva Darshana, or the obliteration of the ego resulting in the opening of the third eye, the eye of Shiva. And from over 30 years of applied work with these calls, I would contend that the Enochian version of the calls acts as a protracted mantra, much like the Bornless One ritual, or Liber Semek. Is anyone, are people familiar with the Bornless One or Headless One ritual? If you look in the Hans Dieter Betts books on Greek magical papyri translation, is one of the earliest versions of the Headless One ritual. And in it, there's a lot of words that you can't interpret. Like when I asked that question of Carlson yesterday, there are just a lot of weird, odd mantra terms, and I don't think you're supposed to interpret them. That's not the object. You're supposed to feel them, you're supposed to hear them. But interpretation is not necessarily going to get you where you need to go. So now we're going to finally turn to the handout to the infamous 9th call, Fire Bear. So go to your handout, and it should be right close to the top there. So I'll read through the English version here. A mighty dart of fire, with 2-edged swords flaming, which have vials 8 of wrath for 2 times and a half, whose wings are of wormwood, and of the marrow of salt have settled their feet in the west, and were measured with their ministers. 9,996. These gather up the moss of the earth, as the rich man doth his treasure. Cursed are they whose iniquities they are. In their eyes are millstones greater than the earth, and from their mouth rain seas of blood. Their heads are covered with diamonds, and upon their hands are marbled sleeves. Happy is he on whom they frown not, because the God of righteousness and rejoiced in them. Come away and not your vials, for the time is such as requires comfort. It's a wonderful ending to a rather wrathful invocation. You have to remind yourself, I know I did at that point, this is a call to creation. Okay? Well, I look at it as a call to create destruction. When you read it in this context, it's talking about, you get the whole image of purging, of burning, of destruction. And at the end, there is a mention of comfort, which is not an easy thing to resolve by any means at that stage of it. Now, let's take a quick look at the Enochian. So we read the English. Mikala's bronze is purging, Octile, Portis, Brenne, Papa, Barbo, Zazo, Shavuma, Cheese, Katano, slightly different thing, isn't it?
Good tonality.
Crowley gave the best description. Whether you like it or not, he said the Enochian calls are some of the most sonorous things ever written.
But which conflicts with Crowley's voice?
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's like that. I mean, you can trust Loveless recording. He did not, exactly.
Nasal little.
Nasal as can be.
Oh.
Poor Alistair, he had malaria. I get asthma once in a while, come on. Now, so your thoughts, what do you think so far? See, the book, The Sacred Alignments and Dark Side of Sigils. When we hear the term sacred alignments, what do we always think about? It's always like something major, stars, blah, blah, blah. But see, I think it occurs on a number of levels. I don't think everybody's necessarily ready to deal with a major alignment of spirits, magical forces from above and below. I think sometimes it'll just be a simple alignment between what happened when I bumped into the table and what I hit on the ground. There's an alignment of activity. And we all had to make sense of it. It's sort of the Zen thing. I mean, you can pick your nose and get to nirvana. Hey, whatever works is fine. But in this case, when we look at the alignment between English and Enochian, I'm just curious, because I haven't posed this to people, what do you come away with? What are some of the thoughts? Anybody?
Like specifically, what are you asking? Like imagery or?
How do you feel the two line up? Do they accentuate each other? Does the translation help? Does it not help? Is it running interference?
I think it gives
I
it
should
an
have been a little more
insight
clear, excuse me.
to the nature of it.
Pardon?
I think it gives it an insight for sure.
You did?
Yeah, I do. I mean,
Okay.
It really makes me think of Arcana 16.
Excuse me?
It really makes me think of Arcana 16, the tower.
Oh, yes, definitely. Definitely. And somebody over here saying something?
Well, you know, a lot of the Enochian keys are a lot like Lukash's constructed language.
Oh, I know that.
You know, it's.
It was a major influence in my
Yeah,
working.
it's obvious that Dean knew what he wanted to say, and there was a reason why he wanted to say it. I haven't figured out exactly what it is yet. But there's a reason that he, you know, that the keys say certain things.
I agree. My point in bringing this up and getting a little feedback, it ain't clear cut. To me, I mean, I'm with you, Lukash, to a point. I think that the English helps to inform it, but to a point, when I sit down and I'm actually engaged in intoning that thing, it didn't cross on my mind.
I think the
I'm coming
fact
up with some completely different terms of feel. Yes.
that it's
Michael.
irrational is a large part of it. It's completely nonsensical with sense added to it. I mean,
That's
it's,
the negative theology. Yeah.
and that's the whole, it's profound, but what the fuck does it mean?
Exactly. And
So it's very similar to glossolalia, where it
Yes.
has, it's automatic speech that doesn't have meaning, but it
before I
has
learned to lose the train of thought, Typhon brought up something really important. It's important, blah, blah, blah. What does it mean? Which is different from saying, what does it do?
Yes.
You know, that's the trap of, and I'm thinking what Craig mentioned about the throat. When you think about the throat chakra, it's the abyss of reason. You want to spend all day worrying about, what the fuck does it all mean? Who cares? What is it doing?
Yeah, and what it does is
What's the trap that the abyss of reason? Reason, blah, 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 blah. And where does it get you in the end? A lot of the times, no fucking word.
Well, they said that the reason that we use the keys in the church wasn't because of what they said.
Yes.
It was because of the barbaric terminology.
Ah, excellent.
Like, all of it.
See, that's what I'm interested in.
The way I
Yeah.
die.
And what you mentioned, Lukas, okay, so with glossolalia. Yeah, that's the thing with my mojo. Actually, at one point I thought, I need to come up here and deliver my talk in glossolalia. Holy shit. I love to watch people. But you have to keep it up for a good 10 minutes before it goes down. What the fuck? That's just, make it stop! Yeah. The temptation's there, believe me. I'm really glad you brought that up. I was going to ask you what the church did. And, you know, and I had a feeling, at first I was sort of prejudiced against Levaz like everybody else. And then when I finally started to get things together, I'm like, I get what's up with him. I see the front, I see the games, I see the smoke screen. I respect the hell out of him. And so it makes sense.
We went for the art and for the mystery.
Yeah.
Because you can't have magic without reality, mystery, and art.
Yeah. And that's perfect rejoinder to what I wanted to say to Lukács. Even though you have some illumination out of the English, it's not revealing. However, it's part of it's part and parcel of it. It's like the coincidence of opposites. You can't totally discount it. You have to find a way to resolve it. So spirit comes to mind, the idea of in-betweenness. We have to allow conscious to take that position of floating in that odd realm of unsurety between positing thesis and antithesis. It's important to keep in mind there was sort of like this race. Who can deliver the Adamic tongue? There was an obsession with it. Guillaume Pastel, the French Kabbalist, he claimed he had chanced upon an Adamic tongue. Pantheist, this one Kabbalist, had this text of Gar, Kadumia, similar in a lot of ways to Enochian, visually. So I'm bringing up because Dee wasn't the only one. And it seems almost like in every age you get that. There are trends in magic. I mean, look at Crowley, had to get, the Book of the Law had to have a woman doing it. You've got Yeats and Magdon doing a vision. It's like, no, mine's better than yours. I mean, there is a competitiveness in there that is worth keeping in mind for what it's worth. So what I'm suggesting here is that there is a sacred semantic alignment between the English and the Enochian. That it's something that one only really is able to tap into through meditation. Reasoning through logic, through linguistics, is only going to carry you so far. You have to be willing to do the work yourself.
isn't that really the basis of Enochian? Is it's irrational and the sonorous, it carries you.
Yes.
Exactly, it carries you.
But one thing I didn't bring up before I should mention, something I think I have an inkling of, I'm not exactly sure. If you look at Barbara's Names of Evocation, Headless One Rituals, all that, you get it in one bang. Boom, here's the invocation. Dee and Kelly have something very special. They're seeing something very basic. It's almost like basic installments in peeling away layers of, it's almost like a bardo thing. It's in stages. And it's too much to cover at this point because the Enochian calls can be parsed out. The endings go in a certain fashion. You know, make yourself shown unto me for I'm the correct, blah, 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 blah. But then you switch to another one.
Well, hot the heads they top.
Mm-hmm. You switch to another one. I love the end of the second call for making a strong C thing. C thing, C thing. Great duality there. Now, to help bridge all this and pull it into a good context of actual practice, things that we can do, things that we're doing all the time. Now I want to focus at the actual Enochian, at the black on, the white on black. Just to give you an idea, when I perceive these, and I would never use the term channeling because I go by, when I look at things that are experienced in the visionary, what comes to mind is something that Schopenhauer had to say in his wonderful essay on spirit sin. That's simply what it's called. I think it's in Carrera and Prolepomena. And in it he says, and I need to set just a brief context. In Germany at that time in the 18th century, mesmerism and animal magnetism was a given. People just, you didn't argue with it. That was just a fact of life. People knew it was there. And so he's dealing with it in large part in that essay. But he comes to this wonderful part. He said, the people who have prescient dreams where they see the future. No one doubted it. They saw it all the time. And he said, these people aren't actually seeing into the future. What they're looking into is the mechanism which is behind everything. They have the ability to look at that mechanism which is at the back of reality and look through the optical lens of time. He had to be a little mysterious about it himself, as clear as a phenomenologist he was. He wouldn't even come out and be 100% clear about it. But I think that's an important point, and that's been said in many different ways. People don't see in the future's here and now. Okay? But what I'm getting at here is I don't buy all this claptrap about channeling. What I think it is that through the meditation, from many things we've been talking about here, meditation, Qigong, yoga, you name it, any way that breaks you free of the normal quotidian stream of conscious activity allows you to get at the mechanism. That's what it's all about. You want to spend all your time investing money in robes and different incenses and everything. If they work fine, I'm not actually dissing it. But the interest in my work, for those of you who may want to look more of it in my book, I'm interested at the mechanisms behind how all of this works. It seems to me, if we have the ability to sense that it's there, we have the ability to be able to explore it and hopefully be able to articulate it to some point to where we can share it and expand the use of it. Now, so what I experienced with the Enochian calls, okay, first of all, it's important to keep in mind that Dee and Kelly, they only had, so you had the calls in English and Enochian. So you had the chant, you had the mantra, you had the tantra, and we've already talked about this a little bit. Tantra is a much abused term. In my opinion, it took me a while to come to this feeling, but a good friend of mine, Garrett Lansing, has come up with this idea. There is no such thing as yoga that is not tantra. Tantra just kind of the semantic roots of it, to bend or twist on a body. So one who does tantra is one who bends or twists the fabric of what is. So we're doing that every time we do magic. So the tantra for Dee and Kelly was this whole pious approach to Christianity, prostrating oneself, etc., etc. So you have tantra and mantra, but they didn't have yantra. And I think anybody who's involved in magic these days, you want to hit all the senses. So I didn't set out, one reason I'm bringing this, I did not set out to do this, it just came to me. That's the thing. I was doing things, I was I was working on lucid dreaming, and I managed to get into delta waves, into Shuddhi. And that's where I started seeing this stuff. And so, like I said, I'm not claiming to have channeled anything, but I just think I got a glimpse at some of the things behind these mechanisms. And so, here you have the yantra that goes with the mantra of the call. Now, when we look at these, if you can, hold it in front of you. Unfortunately, my laser pointer, as good as it is, could not capture the black as well as it should have. And had I set it to print out long enough, I probably would have sucked down 2 camera cartridges to get it. But play with it a little bit, you can get the right angle. And so, the reason I'm having us look at this right now is because, okay, we already talked about the vibratory, the auditory effect of chant. But not everybody has an affinity with that. So if you just look at these and look at them, it's sort of strange. It's different. It has an effect all of its own. And I've had some people tell me they just work with it this way. They don't even do anything. Or they'll use it like astral braille. I've had people tell me they just sort of psychometrize it, because they can feel stuff off of it. Now when you look at it now and look at the sigil, Mikalos, Bronzes, I can stop there, it gets me down. I'll tell you one thing you owe it to yourself. If you do a lot of interested in the Enochian, even if you don't bother learning, learn the Enochian characters, because when you read them, it's actually something like speaking of what Schopenhauer said about the optic lens of time. When you start working with it that way, it's something like almost something grabs the optic nerve. Quite interesting. Now, I know I'm sort of shooting through this, but slight difference this time by looking at this. Does everybody feel, does it seem a little bit different from the other version? I know we're really not. We don't have the time to explore. It should take 3 days to do this workshop, and then I think it makes some good ground. Yes, Cody.
Lori had asked me to watch the time. We've got about 5 minutes before we need to go to the next speaker, because we have a
Good, I'm glad you mentioned me, Cody. Okay, good. So now I can shoot to the crux of everything. There's something that I think is going to be helpful for a number of people. Okay, so when we do magic, we've got ground and background. I think there's a gestalt way to look at things that's really helpful. So, you pick up Enochian, the initial reaction, mine as well, is to go, what's the ground, what's the back? Okay, well the Enochian calls the ground. The background is the incense and everything else you do with it. But I did white on black. So we've got a black background. Now, I know people probably play visual games. If you stare at the black and ignore the white and just look at the background, you start to get a slightly different image, don't you? Think about the black, don't think about the white. Starting to reverse the gestalt. And as I thought about this, and I thought about alignments, I thought more about, okay, if the black background has something to do with this in a certain sense, why not figuratively think about the background to the ritual? How about how you're breathing? How you feel that day? What you did when you got up in the morning before you prepared to do the ritual. It is my contention that everything we do that leads up to ritual is potentially part of the ritual. Because the real magicians that are on their game look at, the frame is broken. We don't have a framed moment. We don't have, I'm setting aside 6:30 a.m. when to do this ritual. You break the frame, you go outside of it. No one's got the guts to leave the temple at all. Well, the temple actually, you begin to see that the temple is expansive everywhere. And I'm bringing this up because I wrote this piece for Edgar's, the one on Cathartic Gestalt and Sigil inversion, where I mentioned that you pay attention to those things. And Joe Barocca expresses it best. He has this thing about juxtapositional magic. He says, like, during the day, to set up a juxtapositional, first of all, you can't do it intentionally. If you try to do juxtapositional temples intentionally, you're wasting your time. You do it by working on hyper-awareness of little things. And I like this one example really a lot because I like to be outside a lot. If I had my way, we'd be doing this up at Stone Mountain. But he gives a great example. He's walking along and he saw a trail of ants on the ground. right when he was thinking about something he wanted to work on. Does everybody see it in the flash juxtaposition? Got the idea? We're seeing a design. He's like, okay, there's my sigil. Then, what happened else during the day? Oh, I smelled something in the kitchen. Okay, so I'm going to make bacon, the incense, as part of that sigil. And he starts to create a juxtapositional temple. Now, I'll give you a hint about how I've come up with sigils. And I'm boiling it down really quick. For one thing, if you got the book and you decided you're interested in the system, but the sigils didn't appeal to you, I tell people, the theory I've developed, I believe, is solid. I give a way for you to actually develop your own. And the one way I set up a juxtapositional temple, I would have a stack of books by the edge of the bed. Okay, that's part of the one image in the temple, and there's another one. And then, so in my imagination, I connected wires between the two and hooked it up to an imaginational printer. I need a sigil, or I'm just thinking about, I want to work on this. Click the button and see what the printer spits out. See, the more you can get design and intention out of the way in generating these things. That's the biggest thing with Spare. It's easy to ball. I think Spare made that clear. You run into problems with sigils if you try to devise them for things that you really half-assed want, that are not part of your desire. But if you do the juxtapositional thing, and you let the sigils come to you rather than use the desire to initially generate the sigil, you're going to get far different results. It's very interesting to do sigils without any intention behind them. Some people would say it's sort of Spare. It's one thing about Spare's system. If your will's not in line with it, you're not going to do anything. That's the beauty of it. I always think, and that reminds me when these idiots on YouTube go, "You looked at my sigil, you helped to make it happen." That's presuming that your will's aligned with theirs. If your will isn't aligned with the desire in that sigil, you might as well be staring at bad 70s porn. It's going to have probably more effect than that stupid sigil that this guy's sort of contriving. So here's what I want to leave you with. You've got an operation, you've got magic, you've got things that you want to do. Play the camera back in your mind. Think about the day, the things that went into it. Try to get a handle on the fact that these things are no longer outside of the ritual, but they're all precursors to it. Obviously, if you carry it to the hilt, well, you're going to go back to birth. But that was the whole thing behind Crowley's Liber Tishar, where you play the day's events in reverse. You keep going backwards and backwards and backwards with it. You look at cause in terms of reverse things. So, we can set up juxtapositional temples. We can use every little thing that's going on around us during the day, and we can use it as an inroad into the Enochian system, which I think has been overplayed as an overly complex thing, and something that's etched in granite, because by and large, most of the stuff that Dee wrote, there's no record of what he ever did with it, if anything at all. Anything at all. And I just want to end here before with a quote. I had to think of a good quote. I got to come up with something witty here. And so I was thinking, Bruno himself said, supernatural things cannot be reasoned except in how they are reflected in natural things. Amen. Brilliant stuff. And then what came to mind, boundaries are illusory as the intellect and higher consciousness align themselves. The more you're in connection with understanding these alignments and these juxtapositions, the more infinite they get. It's a panpsychism. That's what I'm trying to get people to. It's like ritual and magic. Everything is interconnected. Blake himself said, there's no natural religion. Man's perceptions are not bound by organs of perception. He perceives more than sense, though ever how acute can discover. He who sees the infinite in all things sees God. But then I thought for a second, William Butler Yeats in his great play said, where there was nothing, there was God. And then when I got done with that, I said, wait a second. What I'm trying to convey to you folks lies somewhere between those two ideas, the meaning that I want to get to you. And I'll leave you with that.